Henry, welcome to Watercooler Live, or Watercooler pre-recorded as it actually is.
Yes, the difference between the East Coast of the United States and the East Coast of Australia is quite a lot.
It is. Now remind me, I think it's almost exactly 4 years since you were in Australia for the Menzies Research Centre.
Yes, I was there in 2016 in the month of August.
And it was an election year. We were puzzling at the time how things were going to go. Did it turn out as you expected?
Well, it turned out a little bit like I expected and somewhat not. At the time, I thought Trump was going to lose, but I knew he was bringing a populist element to center-right politics in America that was traveling throughout the world. And I think that trend both was true and has held up quite well over the past 4 years. However, he surprised almost everybody by doing something nobody had done in over 100 years, which is lose America's popular vote by 2% or more and win our election.
Has he been a conventional Republican president?
He has been much more conventional than I had thought he was going to be. The populist elements that remain, that he is more hawkish and willing to renegotiate trade deals than generic Republicans, and he has been more willing to rethink American security alliances than Republicans would have been comfortable with. But other than that, he's been very much the generic Republican, and that surprised me.
But it's a matter of style, not substance, isn't it? Where he differs from what you conventionally think of
There are enough substantive departures that it has actually started a conversation within the Republican Party as to how much the Republicans should be open to rethinking trade, rethinking global security arrangements, rethinking government support for people who are down on their luck. That America remains a much smaller domestic state even than Australia, much less New Zealand or Canada or the United Kingdom, and that's something that American conservatives have difficulty with. Stylistically, he's the same pugnacious, quick to anger, quick to fight person we saw in the campaign. And that surprises me because I thought that to succeed, he would have had to become more presidential. The polls suggest that not becoming more presidential may very well be what cost him his reelection.
I was in the US in December in Texas, in Dallas, and I did my straw poll in the pub, and it was 3-0 for Trump. I mean, they were very enthusiastic about what he'd done with the economy. How widespread is that appreciation?
It is very much divided on how you feel about him personally. That Texas is a state that used to be solidly Republican, but in 2018, the upper income suburbs swung wildly to the Democrats. 2 Republicans that represented previously safe seats in Congress in the suburbs of Dallas and the suburbs of Houston lost re-election, and Ted Cruz almost lost re-election. So those people who like him give credit to the economy, but those who don't really hate him, or they say, yes, the economy's fine, but there are other things I care about. And that's why he's in trouble in the United States.
So that's the pre-COVID-19 period. I mean, everything changed in a sense with the arrival of this pandemic. How do you see Trump's performance in the COVID-19 era?
Trump blew the opportunity to make his re-election a great chance to happen. Virtually every leader in the Western world has successfully dealt with COVID by doing what you normally do. Be calm, be stable, put security first, and don't exaggerate fears or don't give rise to the idea that you don't know what you're doing. Trump's daily press briefings in April hurt him a lot because he shot off the cuff. He demonstrated he was in control of his material. And even though I think by objective matters, America has been in the middle of the pack as to how it has handled COVID, better than some, worse than others. Trump himself has seen his job ratings drop since then, and they have done nothing but continue to drop in the month or so after he stopped his press briefings.
We are entitled to be a little bit skeptical about the polls, though. I mean, do you trust them?
Well, yeah, certainly your country is examples of number one of a place where the polls can be dramatically off. I think the coalition was behind in 59 of the 60 polls before last year's election, and they pulled off a victory. I think the polls underestimate Trump's support, but not by a lot. that he's sitting at 42.4% job approval as we talk this afternoon. He needs to be at around 46 to 47 in the polling average to get to where that underestimate will put him in range to win the Electoral College. They can be off, but they're not going to be 4 or 5 points off.
Yeah, it's somewhat surprising from this distance, Henry. I mean, Joe Biden doesn't look a very convincing figure, but maybe we're just looking at the funny YouTube clips. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of evidence to say that Biden voters don't see him as a convincing figure. A lot of polls show that there's less enthusiasm to support Biden or to vote for him than there is among Trump supporters. And he won the primary basically, or the nomination basically, because he was the only possible way to stop Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders, far left, again, for America, far left politics scared a lot of Democrats. And so in a 72-hour period, the entire center right of that party coalesced behind this guy who just a week and a half before had been seen to be a doddering has-been.
So he's the anything but Trump candidate in essence.
Absolutely. He is nothing but a Rorschach test, a blob onto which you project your anti-Trump desires, and people will worry about what sort of president he is after he wins, or at least the vast majority of his supporters will.
Do you think Trump should have done more to try and bring the country with him after his election rather than sort of carry on, crash through, still being punchy, still attacking the media? Should he have been more like a, Lyndon Johnson type of figure?
I think he should have done a lot more to bring people along. I think there were people who were willing to give him a chance. I think if he had been willing to reach out to them on style and in some measures on substance, he could easily have been at or over 50%. Not much more, because Democrats loathe him, and Democrats plus their leaning independents are close to a majority in this country. But there are a lot of people who agree with his policies more than him. But from the moment he was in office, that there was a claim that his inaugural crowd was larger than Obama's. It was patently false. And he forced his press secretary to double down on that. So within 72 hours, the story was Trump's lying about something inconsequential, and he just would never give up from there.
Now, I sense we're at quite an unusual and troubling moment, with whole blocks of Seattle, for instance, now declaring themselves an independent colony or some bloody thing. How do you read what's going on now in America with the riots and everything that goes on around them?
Well, it's very difficult to read. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that despite what you will read in the media, the mainstream media, America has moved significantly beyond where it was 40, 50, even 30 years ago on race. There's widespread cross-racial horror at these policemen who are out of control, shooting Black men, in seemingly oblivious to the fact that they might be or actually are, in this recent one in Atlanta, on camera. There's a widespread acceptance that people of all racial backgrounds are equal. There's also, because of that, and because the looting relatively stopped soon, it's not like we continue to see this every single day in our news. It's something that Americans are willing to overlook for the time being. A lot of people here have said, well, this might be 1968 when disorder and rioting and assassinations pushed a turn to the right. My argument is it can't be 1968 because you can only understand 68 in light of the riots of 65 and 66 and 67. So it was the fourth year of growing and growing disorder. If disorder continues or heightens, particularly under a Biden administration, I think you could see people say we want a racially neutral, racially fair society, but these people don't share those goals and their violence proves it. But right now, I think it is something that is not playing badly for the Democrats as long as they keep the violence and the craziness under control.
And how's it playing for Trump?
Trump's blown it again. That this was another situation where being calm and being above the fray and being willing to support hard-pressed mayors and governors, particularly mostly in blue states, would have paid dividends for him. And instead, he was his pugnacious, attention-getting self, doing things he didn't have to do. And he hasn't gone down a whole lot in the last 3 weeks. He had already gone down a lot. but he's not going up either. And what he needs to start doing is gaining ground rather than holding water at a subpar level.
He became president at a time when America seemed bitterly divided. You'd have to say, on any measure, is probably more divided now.
Oh, absolutely, it's more divided now. The bitter divisions were a sign of a growing conflict of culture that in the United States, because of the role of our Supreme Court, are not decided democratically the way they are in Australia. You know, you legalize same-sex marriage through a referendum and an act of parliament. It was done by a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court in the United States. That means that there is not only a division of opinion, but there's a sense on one side that they don't have to make their case to people at large, and the sense on the other side that even if they are the majority, they will have their democratic rights taken from them. And that increases the bitterness and the hatred that each side feels for the other.
You recall when you were here last time, I think we just passed the election, the 2016 election. You impressed me with your steel trap kind of mind for election figures and results. And I remember you having a discussion with you about the flow of preferences in the Senate. And it seemed to me you've got a prodigious knowledge for somebody who doesn't come from this country. So please tell us, how do you see things in Australia right now?
Well, I think Scott Morrison's victory was an Australian version of the sort of future of the centre-right that Boris Johnson followed up on later that year, and that a competently led Republican Party would be able to bring to the United States. That people who are worried that they have that they are part of the old Australia or the part of the old United States feel that they have no place in the new Australia or United States, like a figure like Scott, who is reassuring on culture, but not revanchist, and somebody who demonstrates that he wants to give people a fair go and a hand up when they need it and encourage them to make it on their own once that's been done. That is something that I think could spell very well for the coalition in the Eden-Monaro by-election in a couple of weeks, where all indications are that it might be a case where the government stabs a seat in a by-election for the first time in years. You, of course, would know exactly when that was, Nick. But
Decades.
decades.
A long time.
So I look at Australia, and I think Australia under the coalition leadership is a beacon of hope as to how a center-right political coalition can come together, and also as to how a center-right government can prudently govern while at the same time expanding liberties, both social and economic.
Now, let's test your knowledge a bit. So what's your take on the New Zealand election?
Oh, well, if you believe the polls, it's going to be an epic wipeout. You know, that Ardern had moved from roughly parity, maybe a point or two behind National before COVID, to being between 25 and 30 points ahead in the last 3 polls. And of course, National replaced Simon Bridges with Todd Muller. A lot of times these event-induced bumps fade, but it's hard to see it fading to the degree where Ardern does not get a second term as prime minister. I think the main question there is, can National gain respectability, which I think would be breaking 35%? And can Winston Peters and New Zealand First make it back into Parliament? They haven't pulled above the 5% margin that would get them in through the list in over half a year. And unless somebody's going to give Winston a free ride seat to run for, which is what National has done for ACT New Zealand in Epsom over the past few years, it looks like the populist Peters is not going to come back, which would give Ardern even more of a free hand to move the country to the left.
Of course, she's done what a leader should do in a crisis, which is cement your authority. Scott Morrison, as you say, has done it too. But it's not automatic, is it? And I'm thinking of Britain, which is an interesting mixed bag. But what's your impression of Boris Johnson's standing?
Well, I think Boris Johnson is displaying both his strengths and weaknesses simultaneously, that he is a good rhetorician. He can rally people around him, but he finds it difficult to deliver in a complex administrative structure. The fact that he permitted his chief aide to travel over 300 miles in seeming violation of the lockdown requirements in order to have his sick child taken care of when he and his wife both had COVID symptoms, is understandable on humanitarian grounds. But since Dominic Cummings' trip came to light, the poll ratings have come crashing down. But that said, instead of having a 20-point lead over Labor, he now has a 7 or 8-point lead over Labor. And the Tories are still polling at roughly where share of the vote that they got. And you have to say, given how badly Britain's been hit and how badly the Cummings affair has damaged the government, I'd say a 7 or 8-point lead looks pretty good right now. And it shows that that center-right coalition can hold up even under stress.
Let's come back to where we started, to Washington, where you are, to the United States. Trump's not looking good in your view, but you wouldn't write him off, would you?
I wouldn't write him off, but I'd say it's less than 25% chance of winning.
As small as that? Less than 25%?
I would say so. I think that, first of all, on the optimistic side for conservatives or fans of Trump, you have to remember that Trump does not need to win the popular vote. What he needs to do is win our electoral college, and his coalition remains tilted towards blue-collar, heavy states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Ohio. If Trump can get to around 47% job approval rating by election day, then I think he'll win, because he can lose the popular vote by 3, maybe 3.5% nationwide and still narrowly carry the electoral college. The problem is he's right now in the 42% range. And even if that underestimates him by a couple of points, that means he's looking at a 9 or 10-point loss in the popular vote. And there's no way he can make that up with coalition composition.
Henry, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your insights. And I do hope we can cross to you regularly for the rest of the year as this election of the president gets closer.
I am happy to come back, and I will be up at 5 a.m. on the morning of July 4th, my time, evening your time, to watch the Eden Monaro by-election returns.
Good on you, Henry. Thanks for that.
Take care.